And now we go to a special new survey done by i24NEWS in conjunction with Direct Poll. Well, we asked English-speaking immigrants to Israel, how will the coronavirus pandemic affect immigration to Israel? Well, 56% of what we call Anglo-Israelis said there will be a significant increase in the number of immigrants. 26% said it would have no effect, and 18% said they didn't know. Well, joining us from our Jerusalem studio is Matan Dansker, International Director for Direct Polls. And Matan, we should explain, immigration, especially from England, the United States, English-speaking countries, is relatively low compared to the total immigration picture, but a sense perhaps here in the community that this coronavirus could really make a difference in that.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's good to be here again on your show. I think the statistics are very interesting, especially when it comes to the question of immigration or Aliyah. And I'll try to explain that. I think the fact that people believe that this will encourage Aliyah is due to two reasons. Number one, some of the people who immigrated to Israel come from countries that healthcare systems have been perceived to fail, and Israel's healthcare system did not perceive to fail. And the second reason is that there's something that we called crisis politics. The Jewish people's Zionist conscience, many times in times of crisis, raises even higher. We see that with terrorism, and now we see it with the external threat, that being the coronavirus. It puts Israel again in that spotlight of the safe haven, and I think that's what we're seeing in the results.
Right, Matan. We should also note that for different reasons, a little complex to go into now, the coronavirus did disproportionately affect members of the Jewish community in places like the U.S., Great Britain, even parts of Europe. Well, in a related issue to that, we asked Anglo-Israelis, what is the main reason for Israel's success in fighting coronavirus? Well, 63% responded that the Israeli leadership managed the crisis correctly, 6% attributed to Israel's technical and military capabilities, and 17% credited the discipline of Israeli citizens compared to other countries. 6% said it was due to unrelated factors like age or weather, and 8% gave other reasons or said they did not know. And I think, Matan, you can relate these responses to the previous question we just talked about, a feeling that certainly the leadership here handled it better than many of the other nations, even the so-called advanced or developed or even wealthier nations than Israel.
Well, absolutely. First of all, it's fascinating to see Anglos say that Israelis have good discipline. That's the first time for me, but that's a new revelation that this poll shows us. But I will say this. Peoples in general, and this is true to the global politics, have a tendency usually to unite within the leader. Obviously, we see different scenarios in the world, but to unite behind the leader. We see that with terrorism. We saw that in 2001 with George Bush. That doesn't indicate what will be in the future.
Right.
But it is the notion of politics of crisis, where people do support the government, and it's worth adding that the Prime Minister was very successful in making the coronavirus into a prime-time concept of endless, press conferences in which he sort of gave the feeling, and he's very good at that, of security and confidence within this crisis.
Right, and it's interesting, it wasn't as, somewhat lower than I thought, the sort of the military and technological prowess of Israel, which is, of course, renowned. In this case, that would seem to have been a lesser factor, and really they put a lot of the credit to leadership, and certainly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Maybe that feeling in the Anglo-Israeli community is reflected elsewhere and has helped him to sort of continue to go on in this role.
Absolutely, and I'd like to add, because yesterday I was saying that the Anglo poll was more interesting than the French one, and I really don't want to, demonize anybody, so I will say that this time it's actually the opposite. When you take the question of Aliyah, for instance, the majority of, it was more French people who believe that this will promote Aliyah, and I think that that could be that many of the French people are already on this wave of being halfway out with the rise of anti-Semitism, etc. And this sort of feels, and the emotions, and politics is ultimately about emotions, this feels to them similar, and therefore it's taking place in the results that we presented to you tonight.
It could. I would also point out another factor that many French Jews have almost kind of one foot in Israel. Many of them have a second residence here or spend many of their vacations here. They're sort of almost in that process, and maybe this kind of crisis is the kind of thing that could push them to take that final step, Matan.
Exactly, and look, you know, the crisis is a feeling that they've felt with anti-Semitism. In America, Jews have felt it with terrorism and acts that we saw, and horrendous acts that we've seen through the country. And the coronavirus, the virus feels the same. So again, Israel comes in to that stereotype or to that true element of the safe haven, and I think that raises those emotions to a greater level, and I think we can see that in the data and the statistics. And again, the people that we are asking are people, many of them who've just recently made Aliyah. I don't think the technological effect of startup nation, etc., is the thing that interests them once they make Aliyah. In my opinion, that's more of an internal way of viewing Israel, and that's why I don't think it comes across as strong as the leadership that was perceived by many as these people to be making the right decisions at the right time.
Right. I'm going to add that Isaac Herzog, the chairman of the Jewish Agency for Israel, was a guest on this show, and he actually confirmed this to the degree of saying that inquiries for making immigration have risen notably in places like the United States, and many immigrants from the United States actually become quite cynical about how many of their brethren will follow them. But it does seem as if the coronavirus, in this case, Israel's handling of it, has definitely made a kind of impression, perhaps both on them and perhaps on some of the American Jews living and English-speaking Jews living elsewhere. So Matan Dansker, thank you very much for joining us.